So, Tom Hunt, when I was doing my research, it seems like you had quite a comfortable start in life. Is that fair to say?
I think in many respects I did. I went to a good school. I had two parents who cared about me, loved me, and they're still with me. And I had some grandparents that also, I think, had a pretty positive influence on me. But I think in other respects, I don't think things were easy for me. I mean, I had quite significant learning disabilities at school. When I was 12, I had a reading and writing age for an 8-year-old. Schoolwork never came easy to me. I mean, I don't think I could do my shoelaces until I was about 14. I couldn't do my tie until I left university. So,
really, my goodness, let's take all of those in turn, because this is so interesting. So, you were diagnosed at 12 with
dyslexia and dyspraxia. Yeah.
We all know what dyslexia is. Tell us about dyspraxia.
Dyspraxia is basically immaturities in movement, and it's being very bad at process and very bad at knowing steps and sequences. Which is probably one of the reasons why I wasn't very good at maths, and one of the reasons why I couldn't do my shoelaces until I was 14. One of the reasons why I couldn't do a tie until I was at university. And it does also impacts your organisation, impacts your ability to plan things, and it just means that you process things in a very different way.
But you can't really process these facts when you're at school, because how do you process it? You just want to be like every other kid, right?
Well, I mean, when I was sort of 12, or before I was 12, when I was 11, when I was 10, 8, 9, I was very interested in sport. That was mainly what I wanted to do. I wanted to play football. I was into my go-karting. I wasn't interested in the schoolwork. And my teachers had said to me that I was a long way behind, and I never really took it very seriously. And I just sort of thought, oh, it'll be okay, it'll be okay, it'll be okay. But then it was when I was 12, and they had a very much more serious conversation with me. And they said that unless I made serious improvements, then they'd have to take me out of the school because I was that far behind. But I was just used to being that person in the class, eyes glazed over, not understanding why I couldn't process information in the same way as everybody else, knowing deep down that I wasn't thick, but most of the time being made to feel like I was. And I'm not going to blame anybody for that, because I don't think there was a huge amount of understanding at the time of things like dyslexia and dyspraxia. But when I got diagnosed with dyslexia and dyspraxia, which I was quite lucky to be diagnosed at 12, I did get some very powerful interventions made by specialists who, they took me out of French. Immediately they took me out of French. The school had the flexibility to make that decision, and they gave me the one-to-one personalised support that I needed, so that I, over time, overcame those disabilities and did pretty well in my GCSEs, did quite well in my A-levels, and then I ended up doing history and politics at Manchester, and then doing a master's at Oxford in Russian history. So one way or another, from being 12 and having a reading around age of an 8-year-old, through first-class support, I developed techniques and ways of learning that meant that when I was a 22-year-old, could look back at it and think I've been academically successful, which for me was never a likelihood. But I would say that I was incredibly fortunate to be in a position where I had the support that I had. I was at an independent school, and half the reason why my dad fought to keep me there was because he felt I needed that additional support. So my fear is that, and for me it was touch and go. I mean, I could have not got anywhere near to where I ended up going to academically, but my fear is that perhaps I was looking at young people with the kind of disabilities that I had. Maybe I was 1 in 10 who was able to get through it. So my passion is to try and make sure that all Toms with those disabilities, regardless of their family circumstances, are given the educational opportunities and support that they need to achieve their full potential. And it really shouldn't matter whether their parents happen to be in a position where they can afford to provide the kind of support that I got. So for me, that's probably the number one burning passion that I've got.
It's a good passion. And it was interesting, you said that you knew you weren't thick. How many people, kids, I don't know if this is too tough a question, do you think who have dyspraxia or dyslexia, do you think, or do you worry, are written off as thick?
I think less so now.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure my dad has the same disabilities that I have, but he never found out. And he still doesn't think he's got them. but I think he's got the same disabilities that I've got. So there's more awareness now. There's more of an appreciation that not all people think in the same way. Their brains don't all work in the same way. They don't process information in the same way. But I still think we've got a long way to go. And I still think there are a lot of young people with learning disabilities who are being characterised in a certain way, being told that they can't achieve, where if they were given the right support, they can't. It's not just about them treading water. Given the right support, they can fly, because a lot of them are very creative.
Do you regard yourself as disabled?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, I'd also say that there's some people who have got dyspraxia who I've been involved in things like Dyspraxia Foundation, and there are some people who do have dyspraxia, and it impacts them in a more significant way than it does impact me. So I wouldn't say I was disabled.
So there were a few examples that you gave. Now, I'm guessing your reading age of 8 when you were 12, then I think we probably know enough to think, could that be dyslexia? Tying shoelaces and tying your tie, are these common things that we need to, are these common symptoms of dyspraxia? Are there? They are.
That's more your dyspraxia. So
yes.
What makes it difficult is there are actually some connections between dyslexia and dyspraxia.
Okay.
So there are some things where it's difficult to know whether that's a dyslexia at play or the dyspraxia. But I'm pretty sure that the shoelaces and the ties was dyspraxia.
Yes.
Because that's very much steps and sequences. So, I mean, something else is computers, process. Anything like that, I'm all at sea.
Gosh.
Yeah.
I'm thinking this is, I mean...
Really struggle with the transitions between stages in my life as well. So like when I went into the workplace, that took a long time for me to adapt to the workplace. And we have our own ways of processing information. And it can sometimes take a lot longer for things to... But when it goes into a right part of the brain...
It's there.
It's there. And then all of a sudden I become above average probably at retention of knowledge. Yeah. But it's just, it works in a different way. And I just think, having an education system where there is that appreciation that not all young people process information in the same way. And if they process information in a different way, that doesn't mean that they're worse or better or inferior, it just means they're different. And actually I think having an education system that embraces difference through things like teacher training and everything else, I think is very important.
How does your dyslexia, first of all, affect you today?
My dyslexia is, I can sometimes, I mean, again, I think it goes back to this point, is it the dyslexia, is it the dyspraxia? My personal view is the dyspraxia is more of an issue for me than the dyslexia.
In what way?
Because of the things like the disorganisation, being bad at process. Sometimes, I'm at my worst if I'm in a big group of people. If I'm in a big group of people and we've got somebody at the front of the group of 30, say, sort of outlining instructions for how to do some practical task, I will be the worst one out of 30. You can bet your bottom dollar on that. I'll be absolutely...
Me too.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got me thinking, I'm terrible at laces. I can't fill in forms.
Yeah.
It's not a thing. I can't do technology.
Yeah, I mean,
forms, I like a joke that I've got a phobia about forms. Anyway, it's not a counselling session for me. It's
some of my loved ones do think that I've been sometimes used my dyspraxia for an excuse for my wherever I go seems to be mess. Like my flat's a mess, all things like that. And they'll say that I shouldn't be always getting the violins out, but I try not to use these things as a crutch. I think if it's me being lazy or me just not doing something, I like to think that I step up to that. And actually being a member of Parliament, I find is good in the sense that you've got a team of people to support you. Yeah. So the great team that I have around me, they have the skill sets that mean that I don't really feel like having dyspraxia and dyslexia as an MP is a major problem. So I feel that is very liberating, the fact that I have some great people around me who are able to provide that core competence that means that I can really focus on the things that I'm good at.
You're really good at this. And you are really good at speaking out.
To be honest, I think when I did my maiden speech in Parliament, I wasn't really sure what I was going to say. I mean, obviously I knew I was going to talk about constituency. I knew I was going to give some basic background about growing up and things like that, but I didn't know the extent to which I was going to make a big thing about my dyslexia and dyspraxia because I hadn't spoken about it that much beforehand. But I just think it's very important that people with dyslexia and dyspraxia and any other kind of disability know that if you're determined and you get the right support, there's no reason why you can't really go on and do things. But I must just raise a point that we're doing report at the moment on the education committee, prison education report, and I was shocked when I found out that almost half of those in prison have got some kind of learning disability. So for me, this further underlines why it's so important to get special educational needs provision right, because it's not just a matter about the individuals and the families, but it's about society as a whole. And it's about saying that if we don't get special educational needs provision right, we're losing the talents. And often there can be a fine line between going on and being very successful and ending up in the criminal justice system, going down the wrong direction. And if your needs aren't being met and you're in an education setting where you feel as though you're not understood, people don't understand you, you can't be successful, it's incredibly frustrating. And you can understand if you feel like the system's failing you, it's very tempting to turn against that system. So therefore, I don't find it that surprising that there are so many people in prison who have got learning disabilities, whose needs haven't been met, who more than likely weren't in a position that I was, where I had a parent who was in a position to be able to put me into the school that he did put me into.
Do you think you've ever suffered discrimination in your later life because of either dyslexia or dyspraxia? Are there forms of discrimination that we need to stamp out in your own experience?
I wouldn't say blatant. I think sometimes there isn't a huge amount of awareness, particularly of dyspraxia. And it's my advice to anyone would be, if you want to know more, is just look it up. The Wikipedia page is actually quite good in terms of providing an explanation as to key characteristics. I think usually when I've told people or an employer that I've got dyslexia and dyspraxia, or dyspraxia in particular, because as I've said, I think that affects me the most, they do look into it, and then they tend to understand more about sort of how we are. But an interesting point is there about how dyspraxia may impact personal relations as well, and how that may be the case as well.
Do you have a partner, Tom?
And how it's not just a learning disability but a behavioural issue as well, potential. I don't know. I'm still a bachelor. Yeah, I'm still single, and actually that hasn't been threatened to be. There's been no threat of that changing since I've been an MP. I must say, the lifestyle's been, incredibly busy, and I don't really know how I'd find the time really. And actually, when I do get free time, I sort of think to myself, on the odd night I do have free, I'd probably rather catch up with a friend, because I'll be guaranteed to have a good time. Whereas if I go on a speculative date, I don't know whether it's going to be a waste of time or not.
It's hard being single when you're an MP, isn't it? Because how do you do it? Because you're unlikely to meet your partner in Parliament, and it's tough using the websites, which everybody now uses if you're an MP.
Well, when I first got elected, I sort of thought that there'd be all these events and stuff, and maybe I might meet somebody naturally, organically. But of course, COVID hit in sort of like March 2020, so that was all that sort of. So I'm fine. I'm 33. I'm sure I'll find someone, but I'm not going to. I'm quite content at the moment, focusing on my job and everything else.
I reckon you'll have a lot of offers after people have seen this interview.
Well, hopefully hopefully has a desired effect. Yeah. It's
been an absolute pleasure. One of the most interesting interviews I've ever done. Thank you. What a champion you are for people with dyslexia and dyspraxia. Thank you, Tom.